in two parts, so I will start with John 1:1. We'll read responsibly, and then if you will start the second part right after you read 8, then you read 16, and we'll stay on the I do the odd and you do the even. So we are reading John 1 through 8, and then skipping down to 16 through 27. Thank you. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
He was in the beginning with God.
All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being?
In him was life, and the life was the light of all people.
The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it.
There was a man sent from God, whose name was John.
He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him.
He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. From the fullness we have all received grace upon grace.
The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ.
No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known.
This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?"
He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah."
And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No."
Then they said to him, "Who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?"
He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as the prophet Isaiah said."
Now they had been sent from the Pharisees.
They asked him, "Why then are you baptizing if you are neither the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?"
John answered them, "I baptize with water. Among you stands one whom you do not know,
The
one who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal."
May God bless this reading.
John's biography of Jesus, unlike the synoptic gospels, is very philosophical. It's not concrete. It doesn't begin with a birth story, but he hops over all of the birth stories back to a land of time before time, if you can imagine such a thing. Very philosophical. Echoing the early cadences of the book of Genesis. And then it moves from the cosmic and the mystical to the incarnational and the material stuff. The fourth gospel upsets our familiar tellings of the Jesus story because there's no nativity in it. A Christmas pageant from John's gospel would need only one kid to speak only one line, and that is, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us full of grace and truth. And there's only one character, a man sent from God whose name was John. And he was a good preacher, this John, measured by the crowds who went to a whole lot of trouble to go out to hear him, because he tried to help them get a handle on the infinite. So we feel a little less lost in the universe. Religion had no better name then than it does now, but there's always been plenty of it. The unchurched call it spirituality. You know that one. Philosophers say it is an opiate to drug us, a system defended by people trying to domesticate God. So God sent John to wean the people off of religion and onto faith. Not easy to do. Being as how the Bible speaks 261 times about faith, but only 3 times in the whole Bible does the word religion occur. 3 times. That's all the religion there is in the Bible. Jesus never mentioned it. Maybe because it was the most religious folks of his day that were his toughest audience. Boy, they were hard on Jesus. First time he preached in the hometown synagogue wasn't a happy ending. Jesus got kicked out of church for preaching too plain, and it turned dangerous when they tried to toss him over a cliff. Jerusalem was one of the most religious cities on earth, and it gave Jesus fits. Every time he showed up at the temple, except as a teenager when he was no threat to the establishment, they plotted to waste him. Religion was more of a hindrance than a help to Jesus because he tried to make church mean something. Well, he shouldn't have done that. By changing the focus from ritual to relationship. That's a big change. Before that, religion was what people did instead of worshiping God. And when our religion won't get us the results that we prefer, we'll invent another religion that will, and then the system takes the place of God. And Jesus flew in the face of all that and got in a heap of trouble over it. So did John. Rather than heartfelt praying, they made up rules about how to go about praying. Instead of righting wrongs in their lives, they devised a list of legalisms about what you could eat and how to wash your hands. Instead of putting in orphan and widow time, they're more interested in keeping their religious scorecards up to date. And this stuff just wore Jesus out. Instead of bringing us closer to God, it becomes a spiritual blindfold that shields us from God. Because when religious people get too religious about their religion, they don't know when to stop. And John was called to be God's stoplight. And he did it well. It's always a shock whenever God shows up differently than the way he's expected. When Jesus came through the back door, he didn't fit any of the boxes that they had waiting on him. Neither did the man sent from God. His name was John, who also got the attention of the big shots, who like to call the shots with big numbers. Somehow John was able to draw impressive crowds out to the wilderness, so that got their attention. But they don't know what to make of John any more than they make of Jesus. And when the box just doesn't fit, it attracts the attention of those who create the boxes and scrutinize others who will not fit the boxes. So they send professional appraisers to check John out. What's this guy about? And they see what people see in him. And they're up on all the rules. They're down on anybody who doesn't keep them. But they come up empty. And that's how the fourth gospel begins, with nobody knowing who anybody is. Why aren't you like everybody else, they say. None of their boxes fit. Is he Orthodox? Is he Reformed? Is he contemporary? Is he traditional? Is he liberal? Is he Pentecostal? Is he high church, low church, no church? Where does he stand on global warming and healthcare and immigration at the border? They want specifics, but John won't budge. Who are you? And he tells them who he's not. I'm not the Messiah. That's not what they asked, by the way. They did ask him, was he a prophet? Nope. Are you this? No. Are you that? That's how the entire interview goes between them, with denial after denial, because that's what happens when we try to cram a guy into somebody else's box. And people are always trying to do that. Families are always trying to do that. The uninhibited are terribly frustrating to the hibited. Their life is controlled by a precise system. It has a round hole for rounds and squares for cubes and triangles for the pointies. But John doesn't fit any one of them. They don't make a mold to fit this Baptist. Because no matter what they say, John just says no. No. And still they persist, trying to vet the voice. Well, what do you say about yourself? They want to know. And John refuses to play ball with them. Mr. No Name with no address can't be squeezed in any part of their frame of reference. They don't know what to do with him. The Synoptic Gospels provide more details about him, describing how he looked, what he wore, what he ate. But the fourth Gospel offers no visual description of this guy named John. We can only deduce who he is, not from what he wears or what he eats, but from what he says about who he's not. He does admit to being a voice. Well, then, why do you baptize, they say, if you're just a voice? His only claim was to be unworthy to untie Jesus' sandals. John is just the interim. You get that? He's not the main event. There is one to come. In any new venture, fit is everything. John's role was to prepare the way for the one to come, and neither John or Jesus fit the boxes of their time. John had his ways. I mean, he's as uncooperative and ornery as any other Baptist preacher. But finally, he tells them something about his cousin. I'm just wetting you down with water, he says, but he is going to set you on fire. What's with that? He said, if y'all think I'm hard to get a hold of, you ain't seen nothing yet. Just wait till they see the light. Neither will he kowtow to their systems or regard their rules or bend to their expectations, because if the light did that, he wouldn't be the light. He'd be much smaller, much tamer, more easily controlled. And that makes their challenge the same as ours, really, to let him be who he is. Why is that so hard to do? To let him be who he is, not who we want him to be, not who we say he's supposed to be. It's one of the hardest things to do about calling a preacher, y'all. Let him be who he is. They keep trying to box John in so they can kick him out. But John has no handles to grab hold of. And that's what makes him such a good witness. He says, I'm the witness. Otherwise, how could he keep our past expectations from limiting the one to come? Both of these guys are unclassifiable. No system on earth is big enough to contain either of God's chosen cousins, whom he plans to use to make those crooked places straight. Jesus once said of his generation, they were hard to please. I love that text. He said, what shall I say of this generation? What shall I liken this bunch? Ha, he should have lived in ours. They're like kids playing in the marketplace. Can't please them. Nobody can get along. Nobody tries to cooperate. When they piped, others wouldn't dance. When they dirged, the antis wouldn't funeralize. Some people are never going to be pleased. John didn't fit because he was too somber, straight-laced. The Son of Man didn't fit because he was too loose to suit him. He came eating and drinking, it says, and they called him a glutton and a wino. That's when John tells them the one thing they don't want to hear. He's somebody you don't know. Whew. For those who are in the know, who think they know it all, don't you know how know-it-alls hate that? Now they had no recourse. He's somebody we don't know. They couldn't excommunicate him because he didn't belong to anything they could kick him out of. He operated outside their religious power lines. He's just a voice. And the only way to silence a voice is to waste the man, which they finally, readily obliged. And John comes into Herod's court with his head on a platter. That's what we do to those who don't fit the box. One of my favorite movies a while back, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. There was a great line in it that it kind of caught me off guard. On the day of Tula's wedding, her big brother came in her bedroom, sat down on her bed and was talking, and gave her some great advice. Don't let your past keep you from being who you are. And don't let who you are disconnect you from your past. Isn't that good? And that's why before we go to Bethlehem, the church sends us out into the wilderness to hear John preach. The scriptures in the Gospel of John want us to know what John had to say before we get to the manger. And the fourth Gospel offers no quaint images of a young couple sitting around a manger or any shepherds serenaded by the angelic choirs. No villainous innkeeper, no magi following a star. There's very little in John's gospel to support the church's romanticizing and our cultural attempts to obscure Christmas. Can I get a witness? That's all God needed to remind us that the principalities and powers of this world aren't as monolithic as they seem when measured against the Word, the Logos, the Word made flesh. And while we're trying to get our own handles on the infinite, especially at Christmas time, when we think about what it might be like, to hold God in our arms, like Mary got to hold him. Mary, did you know? Well, she did, then maybe she didn't. What would it be like isn't that what Christmas is? To hold God in our arms? And only the Christmas message is God will allow us to hold him, but not possess him. Because the purest faith there is not us holding God in our arms. That's religion. But God enfolding his arms around us. That's grace. And that's all the religion the good Lord seems to want us to have. And it's all we'll ever need.